Hello, everybody.
Yeah,
I'm on
hi.
I'm on a little bit of a delay, but hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's Sticky Notes chat. I'm Amanda Stockwell. I'm here with Cory Lebson and Chris Notter. We are three UX researchers talking about getting stuff done. So today we're going to talk about getting research done in a discount way, sometimes also known as guerrilla. So we'll talk about the dangers in running discount user research and maybe some of the pros or what it's good for too. So I know this is a topic near and dear to my heart, but I want to just kind of float the question first of all. Chris and Cory, what's your experience like with kind of discount research?
Cory, go ahead.
Okay. Well, so I'll tell you, I don't really do it. I don't do it, and why? Not because I don't believe that there's a lot of value in it. I think there actually is value in it, but as my role as a freelance consultant, taking on small projects. They are too small. They're too small. Things that are super quick generally isn't what I go after, as a researcher. I mean, I don't tell people they have to do a more robust research study. However, when people want a more robust research study, I say, hey, I'm the person that can do it for you. If someone wants, a quick guerrilla study, I'm like, well, you know what? If you want me, I have time, sure, but I definitely don't put my energy there. Just in terms of kind of having a little thing more meaty to like put my business development time into.
Right. So if you've got an existing client who wanted that kind of thing, you would do it for them or you wouldn't do it for them?
I mean, if someone says, hey, if you have this day available or 2 days available to do something quick, and we haven't actually defined, I guess, what we even mean, but quick, being the quick and low budget and such kind of research, then sure, I'm happy to do it. It doesn't happen that much. But and rarely. But again, that's just it's not a philosophical reason. It's simply that that I choose my market or my where to put my energy, and it's for people that already want that more robust stuff.
And I'm guessing that kind of client also isn't likely to suddenly turn around and say, hey, I heard about this discount stuff. Can we do something else, please?
Yeah, no. I mean, usually my client base says, oh, you only want that number of participants? Oh, you are only going to give us a light report? What are you thinking? So it's not typically my client base. That said, if someone comes and says, hey, can you do this for me? And I have time, of course. I'm not gonna say no, and I do that every now and again. But
so this is one of the things about discount is I think people think that so one of the things, Cory, that you mentioned is that it's kind of cheaper perhaps to do that, and that's one of the meanings of the word discount, but it's also that's not what I think of when I think of discount usability. I mean, it is cheaper because you're doing it slightly differently. I tend to do discount work when clients need quick answers to questions, where they don't need a whole bunch of rigor, where they're going to be doing subsequent work and they need to find, like they might be doing iterations of a product. I mean, if they're working in an agile environment or that kind of environment, they want to test something out. They want to see what's going on. It's pointless recruiting 20 participants, bringing them into a usability session where the only thing you've got to show you want answers to is like 5 minutes worth of content, 5 minutes worth of screen time stuff. So in those situations, that's typically when I do those kinds of things, and it might be that we do several rounds of that, so it ends up being the same large piece of work longer term in terms of budget, time, all those kinds of things. But the research elements of that are taking place much faster, and they're taking place with slightly less rigor, I guess. But this is the thing, right? Is it less rigor, or is it knowing where you can cut corners and still get results you want at the level of fidelity that you need? Yeah. Well, so that's typically when I do it. Yeah.
So what I throw out there is, I mean, I guess we should define what we're talking about, because most studies that I do, if we do 5 people in a day, then there's time to, then the client can iterate, and make changes and do another 5 people. Sometimes it's structured that way. Oh, I'll do 5 this week, 5 next week, 5 the week after. So I do iterative studies all the time. However, I don't think of them as discount. And and there's always a deliverable, in that it's not like, let's have a quick debrief on the findings and move on. It's like, document it in a PowerPoint.
Right.
So by the document in the PowerPoint part, and even if it's like, well, our change log is X, and what we document is this, went to that, there's still like a little more robust documentation. So,
okay, so let me begin with my kind of definition of discount.
Yeah.
I think one of the actual problems is that we call it discount. Sometimes people use the term guerrilla research, which I think has perhaps maybe a slightly less negative interpretation. But so here's the thing. And one of the good and bad things about user experience research is that people tend to come from all kinds of different backgrounds. Some of us have human factors backgrounds. Some of us have really rigorous academic research backgrounds. Some of us used to be drivers or journalists or all kinds of other stuff. So when people kind of make this big bucket of research, which is basically anything where they feel like they have to make a trade-off, right? So like you feel like you don't really have enough time or resources to do the kind of research that would be quote unquote ideal. But let me just go ahead and say that I have worked at some very large organizations with very large budgets, and never have I ever had a project that had my ideal set of time, budget, resources, tools, number of people, etc. So I don't know, I get kind of uncomfortable when we start talking about discount research only being in certain circumstances you have to cut corners, because let's be honest, like everything we do all the time has real life constraints. You always have to work within the like actual timeline or actual budget or set of resources or tools that you have. So I like to just kind of put that out there, that I think when we're specifically talking about like discount research, there's kind of always constraints you have to work from. And then there's certain times where you make a calculated trade-off to say, well, I can't do it exactly how I want to do, or even the like second, third, or fourth choice I have, but I make a choice that I can still get good feedback, or I can still get good information if I go about it this other way that it didn't necessarily, like wouldn't be the necessary ideal. So I don't know, I get kind of feeling even saying the word discount, because the other thing is also it's not necessarily cheap.
Yeah. Well, because I think okay. I think we still haven't really defined what discount is. We've said some of the things it isn't, but I mean, so if I was going to say what is discount usability, it's potentially when you've specifically chosen to either recruit in a cheaper way by going to where your participants are and not recruiting them beforehand, but picking them out as they come along. That's one part of a discount technique. But you're still choosing people who are representative of your target audience, right? So you're trying to keep that rigor still there. You still want them to be representative. You might be choosing to do something in people's environment to keep the rigor of so there's 3 things we talk about in usability: task, user, environment, right? There's these 3 elements that you have to try and keep true to life. Otherwise, really, what are you actually getting when you come back? You've got some fake environment, or you've got some fake task. You're not going to really learn what people really do. So you might be doing something that means you're still trying to find your right users, but you're doing it without necessarily recruiting them beforehand. You're doing something which allows you to go to the right environment, but that might mean making some changes to how you run the study, because if you're in that environment, you can't sit people down with cameras and sit them down in a room, because it could be that the environment is the train on a commute, or who knows, right? Or a cafeteria or whatever. And then the other thing is, so that's task, and that's used as an environment. And then the task, maybe your task isn't actually that long. So bringing somebody into a usability lab with one-way mirrors and all the cameras and all this kind of stuff, for a 5-minute task is, what's the point? It's a waste of their time and potentially a waste of our time. So if you're trying to get your task isn't something that people can do in a lab because they need the interaction from other people. So all of these things mean that you might end up doing a form of field research or something which is potentially less rigorous in some respects, or potentially doesn't have the same build-up that you'd normally have, but often has advantages as a result of having done it that way. Does that make sense? Is that true? Well, is that fair enough?
So I actually, yeah, I'm struggling with that. And I'm struggling with this definition as a whole because, I've done, for example, conference usability testing where we're like, well, we're not going to try to recruit these users, have a booth and just hand out some Starbucks gift cards, $5 gift card, just come and talk for 30 seconds, whatever.
Right.
Things. I've done kind of the mall intercept, not in the mall, but the mall intercept concept. I've done more ethnographic kind of research, watch people as they go kind of thing, and maybe ask them a question or two. But they were never, I mean, it was much more qualitative, much more ethnographic, but I'm not necessarily more qualitative, but it was kind of solid ethnography in some cases, and others not, like not at the conference. But it wasn't, I mean, the cost was actually greater because, between the conference booth or the travel and the research report was still a full research report. It was a 50-slide deck or something, some video clips, maybe things like that. So I just consider them kind of methodological tools and variations, but I don't think I would define them. And I think this is fascinating because, if we're struggling to define this and we all have different definitions, what does that say about discount, about discount?
It probably means all the haters are hating something that's not what we're talking about, right?
That's probably true. And one of the other things, so I want to also kind of bring up, because we sometimes also conflate like discount and guerrilla research. And so, as with everything, words do matter, but so maybe I'll just say this. When I think of discount or guerrilla research, what I think of is sort of anything where you deviate from what you would traditionally do, and make a calculated risk to try to make it possibly less expensive, like money-wise, or able to be done in less time or with less resources, but making like a calculated risk about the rigor and what you're willing to trade off for some piece that you want. Because, everybody knows that triangle, right? Of like, you can have something fast, you can have something cheap, or you can have something done well. Can't have, all three can't be squished. And so what I think of as discount or guerrilla research is kind of like mushing that triangle into whatever shape makes sense for the project or client or, engagement that you're working on. And so one of the other things to kind of point out is that a lot of times we talk about recruiting as a way to cut down. Sometimes we talk about method where you do unmoderated studies instead of moderated, or you do fewer participants. Sometimes we talk about the report, like is it a 10-slide deck or is it a 40-page written full report with video clips, right? Like there are lots of ways that you can cut potentially while still getting really good feedback and making sure that you're still maintaining rigor in terms of and still getting feedback from the appropriate people in an appropriate way. And what that looks like might change even from, like you mentioned, Chris, working in an agile environment. I work with agile teams all the time. That triangle might mush from sprint to sprint, or, like cycle to cycle of work. But I think it's all about just kind of finding the balance of price and speed and quality that makes sense for what you're working on. And in that regard, I'm a huge proponent, because I have never worked on a project where all three of them, we had unlimited time, unlimited budget, etc. Yeah.
Well, so I guess to the original, question that we had, that like do you do it? I mean, I guess what I'd say, as a micro business freelance consultant, I make my business on not cutting too many corners, even if it would have been okay. But people don't come to me. They like, we'll do this thing internally. Will our designers will like quickly run a study, or we'll use some like third party like online service, which kind of throws in some people, maybe more or less the right users, but not to the rigor of, say, an external recruiter who like is calling each one individually. So that's what I do less of, but it doesn't affect method. And truth is, I do 5-person iterative studies all the time. So is that a cutting a corner? I don't know. I mean, because there's always another 5. Like often it'll be 5 and then 5 and then 5 and then 5. So I don't know if a corner has been cut. Passive voice.
And I would argue also that like by doing discount or guerrilla research, like a lot of times you're actually able to learn more overall because you can learn in small increments, and you can have the option to say, well, in this particular instance, I did fewer participants, and in this particular instance, I, was creative about method, and in this particular instance, like I didn't write as full of a report, but overall, over the course of 3 engagements or whatever it is, here's how much we learned about all of it. And so I would say that one of the pros, like when we're talking about also pros, cons, one of the pros is that it can give you flexibility to actually learn more about different things, or potentially look at the same problem or same piece of information from different angles, which you don't always get a chance to do.
Sorry.
There's something that's interesting about what we're all talking about, which is we're all coming at this from a very experienced perspective. And we're all people who, I think the 3 of us could pretty much tell people why we're making the decision to reduce to turn the dial down on some of those sections. What's it? Squishing the triangle a certain way rather than squishing it another way, right? We understand methodological rigor sufficiently that we know how to cut corners and still get believable results. I've also seen times where people who've been on a one-day seminar about, for instance, design thinking, go out and start doing observational studies in their local mall and get thrown out by the security guards for basically harassing
that happened to me in grad school. Right?
So, why did it happen to you in grad school? Maybe because you didn't quite have the you might have had the methodological rigor, but you didn't approach it the way you probably should have done.
It was a store. It was an ethnographic study in a grocery store, and I went to the head of the grocery store and said, I will sit here and do this. But they never told the cashiers.
Oh.
The cashiers saw this really creepy person watching their interaction between the cashiers and the salesman. Like, there's this creepy person doing it. So then it got worked out, and I actually didn't get it. But they almost did.
But no, so these people were literally, these were executives who'd been on I'm not going to say what the course was, but a course which kind of teaches you executives the concepts of design thinking in a couple of days. And they decided that they were then going to go out and do this. And they literally went to the mall and started accosting people and saying, and actually I don't know exactly what they were doing, but they got thrown out for accosting people because they didn't really know what they were doing with the whole participant side of things, and how to anything about sort of participant confidentiality, anything about how to identify yourself. They hadn't got permission from the mall, which is something we always do as researchers. The things they were doing, they were asking leading questions of people. They were doing all sorts of bad stuff in their research, so they wouldn't have got results anyway that were believable. But basically, they didn't know what they didn't know, so they ended up doing what they thought was discount research. Probably after that experience, they were all like, that discount stuff's a waste of time. But it's because they didn't have the methodological understanding of what it takes to do it. So we're all talking about discount from one side of it, but not from the other side, which is the people who don't know why. For instance, people who've always been taught you need a large number of participants in order for a result to have any kind of validity or reliability, right? And we could have that argument for ages, but and let's not. But
not today.
not today. That's a whole nother topic, right? But
Yeah.
then this is something where if you're up against people like that, it's very likely that you're not going to be able to convince them that discount is the way to go, unless potentially they get involved in it and you coach them through the process, because they have a very ingrained understanding of what it takes to run research, and it probably involves large-scale surveys or focus groups in 3 key cities around the country or something like that. I'm being snarky, but you understand what I'm saying.
Well, so maybe we should move on to talking a little bit more about like pros, cons, and also like contexts when it makes sense, and maybe context when it doesn't make so much sense. Let me also be the first to say that while I am very much a proponent, I also know that there are certain times where, when I was talking about calculated risk, there are certain times where you're like, nah, we should not do that. We should not make that kind of cut. So, I have lots of thoughts about that too, but I'd love to hear from both of you. Like, what are your thoughts about, maybe we'll talk about like appropriateness first. Like, when does it make most sense to maybe make some of those cuts and when not, or those trade-offs?
So I'm still struggling here. I'm struggling because, yesterday a client said, I have 3 distinct user groups. I want a usability study, and I want you to test with all 3 user groups. Each one gets a unique set of tasks. Like, totally, there's essentially 3 mini studies in one. So I said to the client, okay, I think we need a minimum of 6 people per group to have to be able to feel like at least we can be comfortable. And of those 6, 1 to 2 probably won't show up because of of no-shows. The 4 to 5 probably we're going to get. That sounds like discount research as we've just defined it. So is
maybe
my answer, I don't know where the bar is. I mean,
do you just not like having it called discount usability? Does that make you feel uncomfortable?
Well, it's not that. It's not a comfort thing as much as I'm still doing a PowerPoint with each group is going to get 15 slides, and we're going to have a 45 slide deck, or 50 slide deck, whatever. So I still don't know if I'm doing discount usability.
So maybe here's the question: does it matter? Does it matter what we call? Or
Well,
maybe
is it really 2 different things, or is it this kind of continuum where you're going from,
So if in fact, I thought to myself, I'm like, well, even, this is formative research. This is design research. I don't need large numbers, and they agree you don't need large numbers. But, really 10 people per group would have been better from a 10 people, let's say 8 people show up. You're really going to feel like you get the total life cycle of every possible issue. But I said 6. Why? Because they said this is our budget. And I was like, well, 6 plus 6 plus 6, 18 people, you still want to report. Mm-hmm. So within the budget that kind of you're expecting, this is what I'm going to do. And I said, at the end of that, if we feel like we don't have enough, then I recommend that we kind of add 1 or 2 people, later on. This study later this year actually will be theoretically in person. But maybe we throw 1 or 2 remote sessions in just, as a bonus if we felt like we didn't quite answer our research questions. But maybe that was a discount decision. If I've discounted something off the optimal, it was a discount decision. What I lose was a feeling that a sureness that I accurately, I can accurately tell you the scope of the issue, of the potential issues. What I gained was a lower budget, and I made the client happy, and I was a good consultant for making the client happy with a lower budget. So, okay,
Well, so that's a trade-off, though, right? And I think maybe what part of the reason I say I'm such a proponent and part of my stance is that, like, you almost never have unlimited time, budget, and resources and tools. So, like, there's almost always something that you're budging a little bit on, or, figuring something creative about. Like, sometimes it's more obvious than others. Sometimes it's an executive sitting in a mall who didn't get permission and accosting people. Other times it's a really well-informed decision about a known set of people and doing, like a few less sessions per group. But I think one of the, like, from my perspective, one of the things to drive home is that I don't think we should think of discounting or trade-offs as bad. I think it's part of the fact that we work in the real world, and that in order to be a good, a good consultant, or in order to make sure the project happens, or in order to serve your team internally, sometimes you have to make trade-offs, and it's about making the right trade-off for the context that you're in. Sometimes it's fewer participants. Sometimes it's being creative about recruiting. Sometimes it's about how you document things after the fact. It just sort of depends. Because there you go. It wouldn't be a sticky notes chat if I didn't go,
It depends.
It depends. But it just sort of depends. And it's about knowing what to pull back on and what to be stringent about and when, and kind of finding that balance for your particular context.
So if we're shifting the conversation just a little kind of from the discount to the trade-offs, then I feel more comfortable saying, yeah, sure, I do that every single project. The project management triangle, like if we change our triangle to time, scope, and budget, it's always a conversation with the client on how long we're going to take, how many hours we're going to burn, the scope of the project, and the budget it's going to cost them. And every single time there's a trade-off, either how fast they want the results, how much money they want to spend, or basically that's probably the two things: how fast speed of results and money they want to spend, and what, I guess, what we can do within that time. And I think that's a normal. I feel in my my consulting world, that's just that's almost a given. Is like I've never done anything that didn't have trade-offs, and if it did, it's probably like the gold pouring out of the sky, where you're like, I'm bored with this. I don't want a study that has 1,000 people. It's like I want my trade-offs. I want something to chew on, a new thing to chew on every time. But
I think yes, Cory, you are doing discount work. If this is the only thing we get out of this session, it's the realization that Cory is doing discount work. But but you're right. That's it. It's part of this. So you're talking. So you've said it's time and budget as the two things that you change. So that are kind of constrained. So it's the scope that you're changing. And that's the thing, right? It's the scope which changes, and it determines what method you're going to use. And maybe, Cory, you're not quite so happy going to the real guerrilla end of things, where you're accosting people in stores and stuff. I'm joking about it now because I actually do accost people, but with permission. So it sounds like you're not going quite to that end of things. Amanda, okay, it's time to do that sort of plug for the LinkedIn Learning stuff. Amanda has courses on discount usability techniques, guerrilla techniques.
Yeah, I have a guerrilla UX research course, and I'll be coming out with a remote research course soon, which a lot of people also, at least pre-COVID, deemed discount research. And so I think that's one of the other things to talk about. There's lots of levers that you can pull in order to reduce scope or reduce budget or to kind of make those trade-offs. And so there's a lot of different things that I go over. A lot of times when we think about guerrilla research, it's that accosting people in the mall situation, which, by the way, I never recommend accosting people.
No.
Yeah, but you could, for instance, like if you're doing a study about coffee drinkers, maybe you could set up shop in a local Starbucks and put up a sign on your table that says, "Are you interested in free coffee? Come talk to me."
So
there's ways to do it.
So are there, from these two courses, for instance, is there anything you'd say is a specific technique that is only a guerrilla technique, or are they all techniques which you've again adjusted some dials to make it so that you're using a technique you could use in a more traditional, more, let's say, lab study, but you've adjusted that technique to be in a discount guerrilla kind of space?
Yeah, Yeah, so I would say on the gorilla end of things, most of it is, or at least I recommend that it be a spectrum. Not everybody looks at it that way. Some people look at it as either, I pay the very expensive recruiter, or I just show up at a mall and get whoever I want. I always recommend kind of finding the place on the spectrum, but there are some things that are, black or white kind of things, especially when it comes to like remote research, and especially unmoderated. So remote, by definition, just means you're not physically with the person. There's no halfway about that. You're either next to somebody or you're not.
Right.
So that's not a spectrum. That's just yes or no. And with unmoderated, although you can kind of do like pieces of a project that are unmoderated and pieces where they are moderated. Moderated just means basically you're there at the same time, like as a researcher at the same time that somebody is doing the thing and kind of walking them through and asking them questions, or you're not. You can figure out ways to do a little bit of both. Like you can have people do tasks on their own and then do follow-up interviews with them. Or you can, I've done, for instance, like longitudinal studies where it began with a contextual inquiry on site and then they did a diary study afterwards. So you can mix and match a little bit, but there are a lot of things that are on a continuum. There are some things that are just on-off switches or like either one. But I don't think there's anything that I would say is just like always a bad idea, always off limits. Like that's too far on the end of one spectrum. But I would say that there are situations that make certain things really not a good idea. The classic example, again, with say you're doing like sort of guerrilla recruiting, you still have to try to get representative people in your study. So if you're, at the example I use in my course, if you're trying to study vegans, maybe don't go to a steakhouse. Or if, like
Amanda's course is worth watching. It's full of lots of little quips like that.
Yeah, like it's important to still make sure you get representative people. If you're talking about really sensitive information, like right now I'm working with a health insurance company and I've worked with financial institutions, you don't really want to walk up to a person you've never met before and like, hi, tell me about your sexual health, please. That's weird. So there are definitely contexts within which certain of the sort of ends of the spectrum aren't really so appropriate.
My favorite of like not recruiting the right people. A client had an English language site and we recruited whatever. Then they want to test a Spanish language site. I said, well, some of our maintenance staff speak Spanish, so we're going to have them test it. Like, but they're not the representative user of your site. They're like, but it's easy. Of course it's easy. And this is our discount. And I was like,
no,
it's not. The language was not the key driver. It's not like if you speak Spanish, therefore you can help us usability test to make sure that that we did our internationalization and localization and all correctly. And by the way, no, that's not the right thinking. But yeah.
Oh
yeah,
gosh.
that's not at all representative, but yep. Yeah.
So saying no to that doesn't make you a non-discount person for sure, Cory. Yeah. That's just good methodological rigor. That's something that's just smart, Oh boy, yeah. And that's discount for the wrong reasons, isn't it? Maybe this is what all the haters are talking about, because I know there are haters out there for discount.
Well,
maybe that.
Yeah.
No,
I've got another example of discount. When I did a usability for a site for a client, it was super robust, like the 3-city kind of thing, and the like lots of users and full reporting. And then they came back and they're like, we watched you, and now we know how to do this ourselves. So we're doing this now, and we're doing it ourselves. It's all good. Can we hire you for 5 hours to just make sure that we're doing it right? And I'm like, well, I'm happy to give you advice. Trying to be, of course, the client, you don't want to offend them and whatever. But they're like, this is our discount. We're not going to use you. And then, by the way, they weren't even like, they were all developers. They wouldn't even call themselves UX people in any way, shape, or form. So you're like, okay, you're the client. Go for it. I'll give you your 5 hours and I'll do my best. But yeah.
I'm super happy to have members of the product team, development team, engaged in research. It's the best way of encouraging people to really understand that their users are not them. But yeah, and I do it all the time. But definitely with a little more insight, education, sensitivity than, oh yeah, we've watched you do it. It looks really easy. I guess my answer to that is, oh, I've watched you sitting at your computer typing on that keyboard with stuff appearing on the screen. It looks real easy. I'll come and code the software for you. Yeah, just give me 5 hours of training in whatever the languages you're using and I'll be fine.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of brings up a point that I feel like has been kind of a theme in a lot of the conversations we've been having about, sort of UX research and skill level, and the fact that we are all maybe a little biased because we've been, we have all been doing this for a long time and we all have a lot of experience. And so one thing that I'll say is that even if you're going to potentially conduct the research yourself, having somebody who has a lot of experience running research, helping you decide what things to cut and what's reasonable and what will be a good trade-off and how to squish that triangle is critical to your success. You might get lucky and learn some things if you don't do it that way. But one of the other dangers and one of the downsides we haven't talked a lot about is that, for instance, if you don't talk to really actually representative users, you might get false feedback, or you might get data that contradicts with other feedback you've gotten, or you might just get kind of garbage that you don't know what to do with. And so not to say that like and we can have this other discussion. I'm very much for including other people in research. I'm very much for having there be other people involved, but I think having at least one person who has a lot of experience helping kind of guide things and drive things, especially when it comes to choosing the methods and choosing the trade-offs and kind of that balance. It is dangerous to put yourself in that situation.
There's a difference between engaging the team in research that you've already planned versus telling the team to go off and do their own research.
Right.
Yeah.
And then in some ways, it also loops back to like a mentorship conversation. I love when clients say, we only want you for a limited amount of time because we have an employee. The employee is relatively new, but we want the employee to get steeped in research, and we want you to be there to like watch them moderate for the first time.
Isn't that fun?
Give them advice. I'm like, yes. And from a business perspective, I'm like, okay, well, basically this is a one-time thing because by the time you train the researcher, but it's not because the thing is, if they're new to research, then you've just helped them get rid of the boring bits of your job, and now they'll come back to you when that researcher either has too much work on or they're like, oh man, this is really probably a bit more complex, and then you get the fun projects, right? And it's awesome. I mean, it's awesome if that's the discount they want to take, like which basically they're still going to be hiring me or us at a kind of a higher hourly rate perhaps, or a project rate. However, the bulk of the any reporting, any other kind of other functions that person could be doing. And then you look at it and you say, okay, well, I tweak that. I wouldn't, that's not what you think it is. You think it's that, but it could also be this. Your recommendation, well, it also might be problematic for this reason. So you could kind of tweak it like that, but that's still a much less time for kind of, and whether it's in-house too. I mean, it's much less time of a senior or principal level person's time. So the project is cheaper. It is discounted in that way, and you're helping somebody, which is awesome.
Amanda, I know this is your sesh, but Aparna just asked a question. Can I throw this on the screen? Because this is exactly what we're talking about right now. It's like, what's the discount part? With the trade-off of discount research, are we trading the quality of information we gather through research for budget, slide deck, or other factors? Are we trading off the quality of the information we get?
Well, so I would say that sometimes if you don't do it well, but I would say that if you can make an informed decision about where to cut and how, is appropriate, you'll still get really good quality information. And if that is at least sort of true, you'll still end up with more information than you had before, which means you'll be better able to make product and design, et cetera, decisions. So while I would kind of put the caveat that like, there is always a chance that somebody who doesn't know what they're doing could totally screw things up, that done well, even with this sort of, discount, and maybe it comes from my start. The very first place I ever worked was in a startup. And we didn't have a lot of money. We didn't have a lot of things, and we were figuring things out a lot of times. But we made so much better, more informed decisions from the bit of research that we were able to compile over time. And we built to be a pretty successful company, and then it sold, and the people who owned that company made an awful lot of money. So, I would say that it's better to get, when it's well thought out and crafted and it can be discounted, I think you'll still get really great information. I think there might be, maybe there's additional things you could learn, or additional things that you could have, potentially covered by scope. But that doesn't mean the stuff that you did gather wasn't useful or wasn't worth it.
I might say, I think you might be trading off certainty rather than quality.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, I throw in that, I find that I'm never the C-suite stakeholder, or even like the product stakeholder, the key stakeholder, whoever that might be. As such, I would see my role. I would see the role of really anybody taking these discount methods as saying to the team, look, you want this, you want this budget, you want this knowledge, you want this this timeline. If we do X, our confidence interval might not be like more like less than 5% or whatever. But roughly, I will feel confident, or I will feel not confident. I'll tell you at the end if I feel confident or not confident, but you haven't given me the necessarily the scope to feel like, yes, no matter what, I'm going to feel confident. So, ultimately, I tend to feel that's not my decision to make. Usually it's like, okay, if you want this, this, and this, logically, this is the way to approach it. You can choose to take that, or you can choose to deviate from that. And it's your choice, not mine, but I will do whatever it is that you decide as the user researcher.
Yeah, and so that again, you're saying confidence, certainty. It's the same thing, right? It's like, and if you know that next week you're going to be running another study and another one and another one, then maybe that's okay. If this is the thing that you're using to determine whether this is even the right direction for your product, maybe or if this is the thing that you're using to work out what your next 6 months of development will look like, maybe you want to spend a bit more time and get a bit more confidence, right? Yeah, and that's something we haven't talked a whole lot about either, is kind of like the stage of the project you're in. I know that confidence and certainty matters a whole lot more, depending on whether you're in the generative phase of things and you're looking for ideas or trying to clarify the problem, versus we've already built a thing, we have a bunch of other stuff we're pulling from, we're trying to assess a live version. So, I think you're right. And I think that certainty is one of those things. It's not either or, it's a little bit of a continuum, but the difference between this much certain and this much certain isn't that big. Right. So, I mean, there's definitely uncertain, which is when you run bad research and you're like, oh, that didn't tell me anything.
Yeah.
Right. And then there's levels of certainty within good research. And how much do you need? How much does your team need? And often you might be more confident with less certainty than the team wants.
And I'll throw in there also that I've done pretty robust studies, and there's still questions. There's still things I'm concerned about.
Well, a good study is going to open up more areas of research anyway, right?
Right. I mean, many times, if I'm doing my robust study with my robust report, the robust report will say, we learned this new thing and we're not certain. Next time, whenever research happens, let's add this to our research question list, because it is an important one.
But it wasn't the thing you were focusing on in this research, right? So you
Right.
had certainty about your research questions potentially with your robust study.
Yeah.
But then it also threw up some other stuff that wasn't the focus of your research, and you don't have certainty about those things. But you found it. You found new information, which is always cool.
Right. But even some of the research questions, the ones you have, can be uncertain. Like I did one study where they were confident their audience group was X. This is their audience group. And when we talked to their audience group and had them try the interface, they made these really odd comments of, yeah, I thought about this, 10 years ago, but and this was like, it was a targeted age kind of product. And I thought about this 10 years ago. What was I thinking then? I don't really remember. And I said to them, you know what? Your target audience was off. You still did good recruiting for the target audience, but that was an incorrect assumption that you made through our robust research. We maybe have to rethink that, do another round of research with, in this case, a younger audience, because there were, mistakes have been made, with the recruiting. So
this is really interesting, isn't it? Because okay, this wasn't a mistake that anybody made other than the original assumption about the people who should be in it, but you could still end up with junk results. They're not junk, but they're not as useful as they could have been from what you're saying is a very robust piece of research. So it's not just discount techniques which can give you junk results, right? Again, if you make those wrong assumptions with discount techniques or with super robust studies, you're still going to have the same issues at the end.
Yeah. So case in point, hire somebody who knows what they're doing.
Oh, that wouldn't be a plug for us, would it?
Maybe just a little. Well, also that's a plug for don't just do usability testing at the end of having built something and assume that is enough research, which we can talk about a different day. We are nearing the end of the time, so I would like to just ask, kind of sum total. What are your thoughts about, I guess, what we're calling discount usability? Pros, cons. When should you use it? When should you not? Final thoughts, Cory.
I'm still not going to use the term discount usability.
But you are using it.
I'll call it trade-offs. I make trade-offs. I'm a trade-off researcher, because I'm a consultant and because I'm I that's what I do. But that said, I think trade-offs are important, and I would say to anybody out there, look for your trade-offs, look at what you have, look at your time, scope, and budget, and figure it out. Maybe you can call it discount if you want. I still
we'll rebrand it.
okay. But yeah, but I'd say, it's all good no matter what you do, as long as you kind of think through the process. You the potential research person conducting research, it's all good, and do what you have, and you'll figure things out, and it'll be good.
All right, and Chris?
I'm not disagreeing with Cory. I mean, I think that until today, I hadn't really it hadn't been a question in my mind as to whether discount was good or bad. It's just something I do when the situation merits it, especially in times where, for instance, an emergency crops up and you can't do what you planned on doing, but you still want to salvage something. You're going to be
2020, man.
right. You're gonna be making adjustments to all those different parts of the situation to make it so you can still get salvage something from a situation. I'm super happy using what other people would term discount or guerrilla techniques, because I feel, I may be wrong, because who knows, but I feel that I have a handle on the methodological background to why I'm doing what I'm doing. I would be scared if other people were off running certain discount or guerrilla techniques because there's potentially more opportunity to screw them up. If you're running a summative lab-based usability study where you're using a think aloud protocol, and the only thing you ever say to your participants is, please remember to think out loud, it's very much less likely that you will it's possible still, but it's very much less likely that you will bias them than if you're in the field doing discount techniques, which might require you to think on the fly and be really careful about your protocol and stuff like that. So there's some requirement to have a certain level of understanding of methodological rigor before you run these less rigorous techniques potentially. Yeah, that's my caution to people is don't think discount is what you should start with. Discount is what you go on to, or guerrilla techniques is what you go on to when you know what you're doing.
Yeah, totally agree. So a push for pragmatism, a push for smart trade-offs, but a push to make sure that those trade-offs are informed and that they are thoroughly thought out so that you don't end up with garbage at the end.
Or scaring your participants.
Or scaring your participants, or being kicked out of a mall. None of us wants that. Although I hope you're not going to a mall right now. Okay, great. Well, thank everybody who joined us. If you do have any more questions, you can follow each of us on LinkedIn. You can go on Twitter, Sticky Notes Chat. You can email us. Our Twitter is @StickyNotesChat, and you can email us chat@StickyNotesChat. And I actually will not be here, but next Thursday, same time, Chris and Cory, you'll be talking about free. Is there ever a time you should do work for free? Yeah, so that should be a good one. Okay, again, so thanks so much again, everybody. I will see you in a couple of weeks. They will see you next week. And again, reach out if you've got any questions at all. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.